Change the law.
Well, we have changed the law in regard...
now, for the two killers of Andrew Harper. We have Harper's law now, as you know better than I, because of the great work of his widow, Lizzie Harper. Why don't you just seek to make that retrospective?
Well, it's very difficult.
I know it's very difficult.
Well, Nick, there's
what you and your colleagues are empowered to do.
Nick, two things, if I may. So, retrospective changes to criminal sentencing is not something that, as a functioning jurisdiction, that we have ever properly considered.
So change it and keep these two killers behind bars. You know that would receive national support.
We are going to be, of course, always engaging with the Harper family. What would be very difficult... I'm not talking
about engaging with the Harper family.
But Nick,
I'm talking about a situation where the killers of an emergency work, and I know now, if we were having this conversation about a case that went before the court today, but I'm talking about something that is called national outrage.
What is up, everybody? Harry here. This is Nick Ferrari on LBC with Labour Justice Minister Jake Richards. And it's a genuinely tough interview to sit through if you're defending the government's position. Ferrari asks Richards to justify the early prison release scheme, including two of PC Andrew Harper's killers, potentially qualifying, and then pushes on the Smash the Gang's Small Boat slogan, asking for an actual number of arrests. Richards can't provide one. This is a real policy debate with genuine trade-offs on both sides, so I'll try to lay out what's actually said fairly. Get subscribed if that's useful to you. Let's get into it.
In the channel and talk about the early release scheme, and it is important, of course, as I always say when we come to this conversation, to remind you that Labour inherited an absolute crisis when they came to power, with the number of jail places in parts of the north of England being in just double digits. That's no way to run a prison system. But equally, is it a way to run a prison system if, and I don't need you reminding about the furore that's been created by the possible freeing of PC Harper, two of PC Harper's killers, one of whom will not see an early release, but the others could be out, I understand, as early as October. And now that's added to, today, by the story that more than 9,000 domestic abusers could be freed as well under the early prison release scheme. One newspaper, the Daily Telegraph, is reporting that Mr Burnham is facing calls from senior MPs to change course by ordering an exemption from the early release scheme for people convicted of killing an emergency worker. Let's put some of these points to Labour MP and Justice Minister Jake Richards. Are you aware of this pressure that Mr Burnham is apparently receiving? Good morning.
Well, good morning, Nick. Of course, I'm aware of huge anxiety and anger at the situation that we are in and the decisions that we are having to make. But what the Prime Minister has made very clear, that as a government, we are not going to put our head in the sand when we see a problem. We're going to run towards that problem and try and fix it. Now, as you have set out...
How are you fixing the one with Andrew Harper?
Well, let me just deal with the wider point that you asked me about the pressure around early release more generally. What is clear is that we face a prison system which is in crisis, as you said. If we run out of places, as you described, then that means police unable to make arrests. It means courts unable to try cases, and the people who are let down most of all from that are victims. So we are building more prisons than since the Victorian era, but at the same time we do have to make these difficult decisions, and I understand the anger and the anxiety that you've set out, but we have to make those difficult decisions to ensure we have a functioning system, and we won't shy away from those, Nick.
Right. But this idea that there is growing pressure as regards the two killers of Andrew Harper, is this now being looked at again? Or, as far as you understand it, are they going to be freed later this year?
Well, we've set out the offences which the Prime Minister has carved out above and beyond those which were never subject to the new regime. Those were published last night. They run to 2 or 3 pages, and your viewers and listeners are able to find them on the government website. It's right to say that 2 of the offenders involved in the horrific incident involving PC Harper haven't been convicted of those offences. One was convicted of those offences. So currently they will be subject to the new regime. Now, of course, Nick, the Justice Secretary has spoken to the Harper family and will continue to engage with victims such as the Harper family and indeed others as well. We will always be a government that listens to victims. We will always be a government that engages with victims. But as I've said before, we also have a responsibility as the Prime Minister and indeed Justice Secretary and me as part of that team to ensure we have a functioning law and order system. And without prison places, you don't have one. And the people who are let down from that, as I've said before, are victims, and we cannot go there. So yes, these are difficult decisions. Yes, they're uncomfortable conversations, but we cannot shy away from them, Nick.
Why don't you just change the law?
Well, we have changed the law in regard...
Now, for the 2 killers of Andrew Harper. We have Harper's law now, as you'll know better than I, because of the great work of his widow, Lizzie Harper. Why don't you just seek to make that retrospective?
Well, it's very difficult.
I know it's very difficult.
Well, Nick,
that's what you and your colleagues are empowered to do.
Nick, two things, if I may. So, retrospective changes to criminal sentencing is not something that, as a functioning jurisdiction, that we have ever properly considered.
So change it and keep these 2 killers behind bars. You know that would receive national support.
We are going to be, of course, always engaging with the Harper family. What would be very difficult... I'm not talking about
engaging with the Harper family.
But Nick,
I'm talking about a situation where the killers of an emergency were... And I know now, if we were having this conversation about a case that went before the court today, but I'm talking about something that was called national outrage that you actually, relatively easily, you and your colleagues, could address.
Well, Nick, we'll always look at the options that are available, but what we cannot do, however difficult, however unimaginable the pain that families and victims are going through, we cannot handpick cases for different criminal justice consequences. There are groups of offenders, and we have to deal with them as group of offenders. Now, I understand that's uncomfortable, I understand that's difficult, but that is the right way to have a functioning government. But look, Nick, of course, we understand the point. We've had conversations, and the Justice Secretary will continue to always have conversations with the Harper family, and we'll look at anything we can do to try and, in any way, ease the unimaginable pain that they're going through.
There is a possibility, you might be aware, there could be some kind of legal appeal, in part aided by Thames Valley Police Federation, to prevent the release of these killers. Can you respond to that?
Well, I don't know what legal action they are intending to make, and of course they have every right to consider their options. But fundamentally, again, Nick, we understand the strength of feeling in the police community more generally, and in particular in that force. As you've already intimated, the Harper's Law was passed in 2022 due to the incredible and brave work of Lizzie Harper. We've also passed legislation in January of this year. I took it through Parliament to ensure that anyone convicted of murdering a police officer or a prison officer or a probation officer receives a whole life order as a presumption. So we understand that it's really important that if anyone threatens or indeed goes on to hurt someone who is really in the service of our country, that they face what we would describe as aggravated sentence, or a tougher and harsher sentence. So we have taken measures on that regard. We'll continue to engage with the police, including Thames Valley, on what more can be done.
In a related conversation, I don't know if you had sight of the front pages. One, the Daily Mail is reporting that 9,300 domestic abusers will be freed under the early prison release scheme. Do you recognise that number?
Those aren't figures that I recognise, but what I can say, Nick, is 2 things. Every month we release 4,500 prisoners, approximately. That's before any of these new regimes come into effect in the autumn. We also know that domestic abuse, and particular violence against women and girls, is an epidemic in this country. So many of those prisoners released every month will be domestic abusers. Now, we have to have a far more robust system in place to ensure that those perpetrators are prevented from reoffending and victims have confidence in the system to go on and get on with their life as much as possible.
When in some instances they see their abusers enjoying early release. How are you going to get confidence there?
Well, that's why we've introduced tougher electronic monitoring. We've introduced restriction zones for the first time, which means that offenders will be kept to a certain geographical area away from their victim, which has never happened before. We've introduced these new mechanisms. We've introduced banning orders, and we've put money behind it. So we've invested £700 million in the probation service, the biggest investment in probation for a generation. We've also invested in electronic monitoring. It's not perfect at the moment, but we are improving it every single day. We understand the anxiety and concern from victims, Nick. We really do. We've invested £500 million in victim support services. Extra investment was announced yesterday in that regard, and we'll continue to do that.
Writing in one newspaper yesterday, the Prime Minister said that he's asked his colleague Alex Norris to look at possible early release of some of the female prisoners, or possibly some foreign criminals. What action is taking place to try and facilitate that?
Well, we have been and will continue to look at what's called IPP sentences, which you and your viewers may know about. There's around 900 IPP prisoners at the moment. There is maybe more we can do to try and ease those figures.
Imprisonment for public protection, just to remind everyone. On you go, sir. Yep, on you go.
And in terms of the female estate, there is, I think, a recognition that perhaps there are some women who end up in prison who perhaps shouldn't be there. And we need to look at that carefully, because there are other women who commit very serious offences who should be behind bars. There is no silver bullet, Nick. The women's estate makes up approximately 4% of the overall prison population. And in terms of foreign national offenders, well, we've had some success. We've been able to deport 10,000 foreign national offenders since we came into power. That's around a 40% increase on the period preceding us coming into government. But we always want to stretch every sinew to see if there's more that we can do. And that's why the new Justice Secretary, the new Prime Minister, has tasked ministers, and indeed they will be involved in ensuring we can do that. So we can ease some of these pressures so that we don't have to make these difficult decisions in the future.
Grateful for your time as ever. Labour MP Justice Minister Jake Richards talking about the early release scheme and again the crisis that was their inheritance in that area. Thank you for your time, Minister. Let's come to a story that's dominating the world of justice and a sense of injustice for the family and...
Watch the exact question that Richards can't answer because it's the cleanest test in the whole interview. Ferrari asks how many people have been arrested under the Smash the Gangs effort. And Richards pivots 3 separate times without producing a number, eventually saying he'll point to a Home Office social media feed rather than cite a figure directly. That's worth noting as its own pattern, regardless of the underlying policies. Merits. A slogan built around a specific verb, smashing, invites a specific measurable claim. And when a minister can cite a crossing reduction percentage instantly, but not an arrest number, that gap is real and worth taking seriously as evidence. The claim is being oversold, even if the broader strategy has some genuine effect. The Bow crossing statistics deserve to be treated fairly rather than dismissed, because Richards' claim, a 40% reduction in crossings and the lowest July figure in 6 years, is a specific data point that would be independently checkable against Home Office figures, and if accurate, is a real result worth acknowledging on its own terms. What that statistic doesn't establish is the Smash the Gangs framing. Specifically, since reduced crossings could result from several different factors, whether French coastal enforcement, deterrent messaging, or traffic or network disruption, and only the last of those is actually what's smashing the gangs, implies Ferrari's challenge isn't really disputing the reduction happened, it's disputing whether the specific mechanism claimed, arresting traffickers, is the demonstrated cause of it. The prison capacity argument is worth engaging with on its own genuine difficulty rather than dismissed as pure spin, because Richards' underlying point that a prison system running out of space eventually prevents police from making arrests and courts from trying cases describes a real structural problem in criminal justice systems generally, and it's a defensible reason for facing hard trade-offs even if you strongly disagree with how those trade-offs were resolved. The distinction Richards draws, that early release policy applies to categories of offenders rather than individually selected cases, is also a coherent principle about equal treatment under the law. Separate from whether the specific categories drawn are the right ones. Where Richards' position runs into real difficulty is the retrospective law question specifically, because Ferrari's challenge there is narrow and concrete. Could Harper's law be made retrospective to keep 2 specific convicted killers of a police officer behind bars? Richards' answer: that retrospective sentencing changes aren't something the UK justice system properly considers, is a real and long-standing legal principle. Not an evasion, but it's also true that principle applies just as firmly, regardless of how sympathetic or high-profile a specific case is, which means the emotional weight of this particular case doesn't actually change the legal analysis. However difficult that is to say plainly in the moment, if breakdowns like this are useful to you, get subscribed to Harry Unfiltered, and I'll keep checking the specifics properly, one interview at a time. There's also a broader interviewing lesson worth pulling out of the Harper's Law exchange specifically. Ferrari doesn't ask Richards to defend the general policy of early release in the abstract. He narrows to one specific named case and asks for a specific legal mechanism to address it. Richards' answer works as a defense of the general legal principle, but it doesn't fully engage with why that specific case, given the retrospective legal precedent already set by Harper's law itself, couldn't be treated as a narrow exception rather than a wholesale departure from the rule. That's the kind of gap between a general defense and a specific question that's worth watching for in any policy interview, regardless of which government or party is being questioned.